Good morning and welcome to our webinar, Safer Homes, Lower Cost and Delivering the Golden Thread. We're here to share with you a preview of the Information Management Initiative that is formally being launched next week, and most particularly to put that in context for providers of social housing. I've been involved in social housing for nearly a decade now and facilitated the creation of the UK Housing Data Standards for HACT, and advise the government on the Building Safety Bill and now the Building Safety Act. I've seen firsthand in the consultancy and research work that we do at Dataplan how social housing providers are adapting to the growing demands, particularly from residents and regulators. And it isn't easy. This is a challenging journey. I've seen some providers make excellent progress, whilst others struggle to gain traction for the necessary change. And where there is success, it is all too often uncoordinated. I've been involved with the Information Management Initiative over the last year or so, and I want to make one thing very clear right at the outset. This is an attempt to simplify information management. It is not just another thing that you have to do. Get this right and you'll save time, you'll save money, release resources and deliver better for your customers. I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by three amazing guests who are going to help unpack this for you. Anne has 30 years of experience as Fellow and Technical Director for Digital Engineering and BIM Strategy and Development at Atkins. She is Chair of NEMA and Convener of the International Standards Organization Committee for the 19650 series, focusing on managing information for the whole life cycle of the built environment. This in turn drives the UK BIM framework, the basis of the Transforming Infrastructure Performance 2030 Information Management Mandate. Anne is co-lead for the digital workstream of the Construction Leadership Council, and over the past 12 months has been chairing a CLC initiative and consultation looking at a refreshed approach to the Information Management Mandate. She's a past chair of the Association of Geographic Information, recipient of the ICE's President's Medal and Geospatial Professional of the Year, and an OBE for Digital Construction Innovation. Bola is a leading figure in digital construction and diversity. As founder of the Digital Twin Skills Academy and Diverse City Surveyors, he champions digital transformation and inclusion across the industry. A fellow of the RICS and member of the CIOB, he's driven by PQS 2030, aiming to use digital twin technology in professional services. His extensive roles and participation in the Gemini Council, City of London Task Force and CITB show his commitment to shaping the future of construction. Awarded an OBE and honorary degrees, he's a pioneering and influential industry leader. And Hannah is Director of Asset Management at Home Group, one of the UK's largest providers of high quality housing and integrated housing, health and social care. She was previously Director of Property for fund manager Gresham House, where she was responsible for their residential portfolio, including shared ownership assets held in two for-profit registered providers, Resi Housing and Resi Homes, their BTR and retirement PRS portfolios, as well as temporary accommodation. And prior to Gresham, Hannah worked for Croydon Council's wholly owned development company, Brick by Brick, as head of property and engagement, where she oversaw acquisitions, disposal, own market sales, and management of their completed developments and stakeholder and community engagement. So, during the webinar, please use the Q&A to ask any questions you would like to address to the panel towards the end. Any questions that we don't get to, we will follow up with after the webinar, so please don't be upset if we don't get to deal with it during the webinar. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Anne, who can hopefully tell us a bit more about the Information Management Initiative and where it came from.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Real pleasure to have the opportunity to talk to you today. So yeah, what I'd like to do is to give you a brief introduction to the Information Management Initiative. As Chris says, we'll be launching formally next week. But what we want to do today is to make sure that you understand how relevant it should be for you that it should be helping you. It's not an additional thing. And we want to make this easier for you to actually really engage with this initiative. So how are we going to do that? What we have at the moment, with this next slide, is a lot of you may be aware there was a BIM level 2 mandate in effect within the UK from 2016 from a government perspective. So this was from a public sector perspective. This was then reinstated within the Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap to 2030, which Chris has mentioned, and it cites what is the UK BIM framework at the moment, that also within the construction playbook. But moving on to the next slide, it's very clear when we've been doing consultation across the whole of the built environment sector that the perception is, and it's quite true, it's never formally mandated. How could it be for the whole of the industry, for the private sector, for the supply chain? There's a perception which isn't actually correct, as it was just about information and document. It wasn't about the data itself. And people didn't understand how they could approach it that way. Certainly that its roots came from design construction, so that it wasn't relevant for asset management, for facilities management, operations. It actually certainly should be. And the value and the benefits weren't clearly articulated. So, why should I do it? What's in it for me? Was not compelling. And it doesn't help the user either. So what we wanted to do, therefore, was to really target what are the benefits which are relevant to you specifically. Now, the overarching one is delivering trusted data to support better whole life outcomes. That could include those bullets, the 9 there, but actually what is relevant for you specifically. So one of the things I think we've learned from previous ones is it's no good having this very wide, ambitious, overarching benefits and stuff if it's not actually relevant for you. So it needs to be able to motivate the trades. It needs to motivate the individuals. It needs for people to understand who are the residents, why it's important for them. Because they may not be able to do anything, but they could be saying, look, you really need to get better. This is not serving me in the right way. There are potential savings to be had, but again, that can seem very esoteric. So we need to convert that to something which actually lands and means something to you. So on this next slide, what we've really come up with is this solution, is that we want to do a call for action, which is much, much easier for people to come on board. So it's really just saying that I acknowledge that information management is important. I don't really understand it yet, but I'd like to get to the point of understanding those basic principles. Can you help me on this? And this is what the initiative really wants to be stepping up to. Then fine, then there's a directive which will be sector-wide, which is really putting detail to those principles. At this point, it's not referring to any standards, it's not getting too technical, but it's really helping you to start take those steps steadily in a proportionate way for you, in a way which reflects your current capability and capacity. And then the critical thing is we then invite organisations to mandate within their organisation. So it actually means that the mandate can come alive. It's actually meaningful, that it's very, very specific to what the role of your particular organisation, your teams, your individuals, it can be customised to that. So it becomes far more relevant and you know what you need to specifically do to actually fulfil your part in managing information across the whole of the built environment or across, for here, the social housing sector. And then the framework, and this is where there needs to be a lot of work done, will then help to actually guide you into those relevant rules and methodologies, which are set within the standards and so forth. But the difficulty at the moment is it's overwhelming. The last thing we want is for anyone to feel that they've got to go into all of the standards, all of the guidance, when it isn't really specifically directed at themselves. So again, we want to be developing resources which are much more about the how-to guides and giving you tools actually to be able to equip you. So where are we at with that? If we go on to the next slide then, as Chris says, we're going to be launching next week. It's free to register, so do please feel welcome to do so if you click on the link, which I think we're sharing the slides after Chris. And then there's a whole series of events that are coming up. And I'm not going to go through that whole list, but again, we'll go into more detail. We'll make it more specific to particular audiences. But the main thing is reach out to us. If you need help, reach out to us and we'll see what we can do. Just remember, we're launching the initiative. We will, as is now going to be shown on the next slide, there will be phases we need to go through. So that foundation, early engagement, going right through to full implementation. And what we want to be doing is, this is industry-led. So it's Construction Leadership Council along with NEMA and a huge number of volunteers coming on board to help. And what we want to do is to encourage government to then reissue a mandate over a period of time. You'll notice we haven't put times here because the important thing is we will need resource, we will need funding as well going forward. So what we can achieve will need to be proportionate to that. But all I can say is we are absolutely determined to make this a success and to help you in actually moving forward and improving how you manage and understand managing your data and your information. So finally then on my slide is just to explain to you, well, who's behind this, how does it work? There's a steering group, which is going to be the owners, which is Construction Leadership Council along with NEMA. British Standards Institution will be represented on that, and then people who come on board as sponsors or as supporters. You'll see the steps that I've already gone through, so that call to action, which is very high level, going forward to helping people setting up their own relevant and proportionate internal mandates with resources which help them to do that. So NEMA will be in the background managing that with its volunteers. As I say, the way that we're able to move forward will be dependent on how much resource and funding we get going forward. I think that's pretty well it for the moment from a formal presentation, but I'm looking forward, Chris, to the panel discussion and some challenging questions. So back over to you.
Thank you very much, Anne. Fantastic introduction to what this is all about. So next, I'd like to take it in a slightly different direction. So Bola, perhaps you can share your perspective and talk a little bit about why this really matters to social housing.
Well, thank you, Chris, and good morning, ladies and gents. Thanks, Anne, for that wonderful invite. So a little bit of perspective. This is all about the why in social housing, apart from the fact that 72 people are no longer here. If we needed a moral compass and a moral reason to do this, I think that is sufficient for that purpose. The DTSA, we're all about EdTech and young people and really helping the sector and asset owners on that challenging resident engagement piece. Next slide. To that end, there's only one question that matters. Why is the golden thread so important? I think Anne Kemp has articulated the why, but I'm going to go straight to this slide. This is and was Sir Martin Morbick, 11 a.m., 4th of September. If we needed a reason to get this done, to understand IMI, to understand our role, it's on this slide. Incompetent, dishonest, and greedy. That is what Sir Martin Morbick said. And that is the moral reason for us to get this right. On the next slide, you will see some very, very useful references. The golden thread, according to the CLC. It's a document that actually is quite encompassing. It's a ground zero for better information management, aka IMI. And therefore, I'll leave you all to go and read that wonderful document if you've not done so already. Adding to that, I wanted to just clarify one or two elements of the reason behind the why. So there are two boxes you need to pay attention to. The one on your right-hand side, the IMI is all about right people, right information, right time, very simply. And on the left-hand side, there are a number of bullet points, and I'll take you straight to the last one that talks about collaborative and digital ways of working. The IMI is all about making this a tangible reality, ladies and gents. And for the young people in the audience, take heed of the legal basis for the golden thread. Next slide. Moving very quickly to the model that makes it all happen. Gateways. If you're not fluent, understand one thing. The bottom left-hand corner talks about the golden thread being for life. The entire whole life cycle of the asset comes under the guise of the golden thread. It never stops until you decommission the asset. And then you can talk about circularity. But the question I wanted to ask the audience on the right-hand side is, should this workflow be adopted? And if so, are you ready? And that's really targeted at the accountable persons, one of which we have on the panel today. Thank you, Hannah. Next slide. There are solutions, but there are two scenarios, CapEx and OpEx. On the right-hand side, CapEx, 5D digital twins. If you're not familiar, I won't dazzle you with the science, but the 5D twin is what you need if you're building something new. No excuses. You're leaving money on the table if you don't. On the left-hand side is the OpEx solution. This is retrofit, decarbonization, repairs and maintenance. It's where I sit and have done for about 25 years. And again, what are the drivers? Portfolio compliance, asset level optimization, and of course, saving money. I am a QS. I would say that. Next slide. There are some low-hanging fruit solutions. We're working on one now. We're working with 2 clients in West London on this very simple dashboard solution. It's all about data, aggregated data, structured data for the right reasons. Everything that Dr. Ankamp has said already is what we're working on as a solution in the market. And on the next slide, there are a couple of screenshots as to what we're doing and how we're aggregating data, where we're taking sources from, what we're doing in the process, and how we're actually making you as the client asset owner more clearer on the visibility of those risks that surround you as a business. Here are some key pain points that we're aware of: compliance, cost, schedules, risks, assets, and repairs. Stuff you're all familiar with, but there are quick win solutions. We're a reporting platform. We do that really well. And again, we ask questions that maybe you don't want the answers to, but that is the whole point of the IMI, giving you that visibility on some of those dark corners of data that you're not aware of. Next slide. To that end, why am I here? Why are we doing this? We are, as it says, trying to create the talent pool that the industry doesn't know it needs. Young people. And I am the Chief Excitement Officer. Yes, I'll say that again. I'm the Chief Excitement Officer, and I'm here to make you smile. On the next slide, I'll tell you why I want to make you smile. Because this challenge of the golden thread is difficult. It's challenging. And we're focused on young people. We're creating social value digital twins using IMI as a driver to engage a wider talent pool, a more diverse and representative talent pool. And we're going to have fun doing so because we're aligned to those values regarding Section 106 and KPIs. So finally, and I had to share this slide really for Mummy. Mummy said, make sure you tell them you know some really important people. Apart from the young people in this audience, I have been around and met some very senior figures, all of whom believe in the reason why we're doing what we're doing at the Academy. But more to the point, we have a solution that we can share with you, and it's pretty much encapsulated in one term called the Information Management Initiative. It goes live next month, and I want to thank you, Chris and Gemma, for the opportunity to contribute. And like Anne, I look forward to a very challenging panel conversation. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, thank you, Bola. You never cease to meet the brief of keeping it alive. So thank you. So now let's move on to Hannah. So Hannah, as Director of Asset Management for Home Group, I know that you see the challenges with information every day. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about your role, Home Group, and these challenges and the opportunities as you see them.
Sure. Thanks, Chris, and thanks, Bola and Anne. To hard act to follow, I think, given your expertise in the sector. And I guess I come at this from a property owner's point of view. So I've worked in property for about 15 years now, and I still find myself scratching my head that we're still grappling with data and process around data, and what seems to me to be so simple, and I'll go through my analogy later, but we still have a big problem. And actually, if it were so simple, we'd have solved it by now. But I think this is so I'm at Home Group, Director of Asset Management. We've got 58,000 homes, majority are rented, and we've got a lot of data around those properties. But I think it's fair to say we are on an exciting data journey. I think my colleagues are all behind this. Next slide, please, Chris. So something we get, we talk about data all the time, and we have tons of data, but it is hidden, buried, unstructured, unformatted. we're constrained by our systems. And I think the big point for me is being on the asset management side. When you have a construction project, it starts and it finishes, and the data at the point of completion, practical completion, is set, provided that that's all right and you've got your as-built drawings. The moment that building gets handed over, the data moves. And for me, that's the bit that we need to get a handle on, because I'm very fortunate. I have development colleagues who understand this. They have a vested interest, but we still need to do better at managing that data, and particularly on our legacy stock, our historic assets. Next slide, please, Chris. So this is when I try and sort of explain to people what I mean around data and how we can use it and what that means. I sort of came up with this sort of store cupboard cooking analogy, and how I see the IMI, helping us with that. If you think that when you go to cook something, you automatically go to the kitchen, you open the cupboard, you know where your ingredients are. If we could just do that with our data, and we could find it and access it and know what we have, know what the sell by date is, know when we can and can't use it, that will enable us to bake a lovely cake. Well, actually, what that means is we can look after our customers, we can understand our assets, we can make financial decisions around them more confidently, and we can start analysing it, we can start getting insights. Could you go to the next slide, please, Chris? I was going to talk through, I think, Bola, you've touched on the building safety golden thread. I think that's an absolute fundamental use of data, and we must get that right. But I think it goes beyond that. And I thought of another example, which was the due diligence on an acquisition. Thanks, Chris. When my previous roles, I've bought a lot of properties, and I was looking through my old trackers, and there's probably about 200 documents per unit that you would request as part of an acquisition to understand what those assets are like, in terms of, are they to a standard, are they meeting compliance, what are we buying, what are we getting, to understand those risks. And that's a really manual process. You get the documents, you might ask for a document, you get a different document. There's huge disparity in the information you obtain, even from data rooms, even from people's interpretations, and there will be missing information. But if that data was structured and we all assigned to a standard and a way of reporting, and we all had a common understanding of what we meant when we said OPEX or CAPEX or compliance, that would enable us to then make very quick decisions in what can be a very time-sensitive environment. Next slide, please, Chris. So this may look very bland and boring, but actually, I went through this in my head, and I thought, well, actually, let's think of an individual component in a property. So your boiler, for instance. To get this level of data, for me, and in my experience, not just at Home Group, but in property generally, I probably have to go to about 20 different spreadsheets or systems, or, it is not obtainable readily. And it's not extractable in a format that I can then populate, for instance, a dashboard like Bola showed us on the previously. If we could get this information, and if it was available, not only does it help us make acquisition decisions, it also helps us to understand the performance of our assets. If you can put this across your components, so build it into your stock condition, you're very quickly building up a picture, and you can apply your defects management learnings from this. You can understand what components don't work. And it gives you so much more insight than what we currently get. It also enables us, I think, to align ourselves to handover of properties. You know, we will take on kit that perhaps our repairs and maintenance teams aren't familiar with, but if we can set it up and we can show, well, actually, this is your maintenance regime, and that's then controlled, and you can then monitor that. Any arguments around, well, you've not maintained it in accordance with the manufacturer's guidance can be quickly cancelled out because you've set it up from the start. I could go on and talk about this. I think that the discussion will kind of get into the weeds, but I think that's my very simple example of one benefit that serves multiple purposes. And then, as you said at the start, Chris, what does this mean? It enables us to be truly data evidence led. It enables us to collaborate better. And I made a note, I think something that's quite relevant to the sector at the moment is the TSMs, and particularly where we don't, housing providers that own intermediate leasehold interests in properties, where we have to obtain data from our superior landlords, stakeholders. If we all had a common way of storing our data, that would just be very quickly a download and an upload into another provider's system to show that building is being properly managed. It will benefit beyond the social housing sector. I think it will benefit leaseholders and freeholders' transparency around how they manage buildings. And what does that mean? It means that we've got happy customers and satisfied customers and customers who trust and believe that we're doing the best for them because we can actually articulate it. So thank you. I'll leave it there.
Hannah, let me bring Anne and Bola back. So really interesting perspectives there. Thank you all for kind of sharing those very different views. I wonder whether we can now perhaps talk about this in the round for our social housing colleagues and providers of registered providers. And perhaps starting with you, Anne, you mentioned that there's been a BIM mandate before. I mean, why have we got another one? What lessons have we learned from that?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's not mandate at the moment. It's not coming from government. And I'd almost ask the question back to the audience. I strongly suspect that when that mandate occurred in 2016, you thought, well, it's not relevant to me. So I think the very first lesson we have to learn is that this has to be relevant. It has to come alive. It has to help. Whereas before, it just felt, oh my goodness, there's this requirement beyond me, and then there's this framework, and now I've got to look at standards, and I can't do all of that. And no, you don't need to do all of it. So our very first lesson is to simplify it and make it relevant. And I think what I would say is, do come forward with the call for action and come on board, because what we want to do is we want to find out how we can help. What do you need? So Hannah, your example there of the list of for what you'd need from a boiler perspective, we have got people who've got answers there. The problem also is then being able to orchestrate this so that we can bring it together so it's a coherent cake rather than a cake which collapses because everybody's got a different view on it. So again, that's that collaboration piece which Bola was referring to as well. So, and there's many lessons on there, but I think those are perhaps the most relevant here.
Yeah, that's really great, Anne. And I mean, you mentioned the cake. One of the things that you touched on, Hannah, but I'd really like to call out was that on that picture you also had the recipe book. And it's important to remember, of course, that the Information Management Initiative is, yes, very much about the data and the information, but also those supporting processes that allow you to actually do the right things with it. And so the recipe book is a really key part. And I think, Anne, you touched on this with your suggestion that the guidance needs to be very focused. You don't pick up Delia Smith and learn how to grind the flour, right? I mean, it's like you take the flour because that's already ground. That was somebody else's problem. You don't need to understand everything in that supply.
And Chris, that does, because I think the thing is that it's not for everybody to solve everything. In a way, it will also help us to spotlight where actually we need to influence a certain group of people, companies, to actually behave better or do their piece, because otherwise how can the trades, the plumbers, actually help to move forward? There's a limit to what they can do. They can certainly, and they're very frustrated, a lot of them as well, and I'm sure Bola you'll refer to this as well. So not expecting everybody to do everything, and this isn't about naming and shaming, one would hope, but at the same time I think we all need to come to this in a humble way, don't we, and understand what our role is, to do what we can, and then to help others to also play the game too.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair point, and and Bola, you referenced the phase 2 inquiry report after Grenfell, and it's really clear in that there were some really, really poor actors in that whole world. But even that aside, even when people are acting in a deeply negligent criminal way, I think it's probably fair to say, as an industry as a whole, looking at our entire supply chains, we all have some culpability here. Clients have not always been great at asking for the right things from their supply chain. Manufacturers have not always been great about providing the information about their products and materials in a really clear, easy to use way. The construction sector and the consultants also have not always been very joined up and not always responded in the interests of their clients. Not through lack of trying necessarily, but there's a real kind of conflict sometimes where everybody's kind of hoping somebody else will pull it all together and achieve that coordination. It doesn't seem to have quite happened in a lot of cases. Bola, you talked a little bit about digital twins, and I know you're a huge advocate there. How do digital twins and the IMI relate to one another?
Well, Chris, that's a great question. There was always the risk that this conversation was just not going to be long enough, right? And I'm already salivating by what I've heard from Anne and Hannah. But for me, and for those that don't fully understand or appreciate, a digital twin is a virtual representation of a system, asset, or process. And in essence, the utopia slide that Hannah put up is technically the foundation layer of the key points within a twin solution that could be brought to life with or without graphical data, right? So picking up on the point that Anne made about the site-based employees, this is where the golden thread and IMA will fail. This is why we ended up technically with Grenfell. The relevance of ontologies and structured data is so important, right? And that's the secret to this. The recipe book that Hannah mentioned is the silver bullet in many ways. But the relationship between the golden thread and digital twins is intrinsic. And that ability to pull on real-time data at a component level, if need be, can be done with a twin solution, because you've got that perpetual data loop talking to each other, physical to virtual. But what we need, Chris, is upskilling. It's the reason why we started the academy. This will not happen at any level, senior, mid-management, operational, graduate, student, site, unless we all upskill. And within the confines of IMI, there's an upskilling piece that we're driving forward. But our challenge is not technology or process, it's people, cultural. We need more of these conversations so that we can all understand our value and our role within the IMI agenda, and then implement it. We actually got to go and do it, right? And that's where we're getting stuck, in a state of paralysis across the sector. Although present company excluded, Hannah, of course, is a champion, but outside of home group, there are some horror stories unraveling at the moment. And my concern is that every site that is open today that is not capturing the golden thread / IMI in the right way, it's a missed opportunity and potentially a headache for the asset owner if things go pear-shaped. So it's a collective skin in the game scenario. It's a completely different paradigm shift, and it's exciting, right? Let's not forget the excitement.
Yeah, that's I couldn't agree more, Bola. I mean, it's Anne will know that I sometimes feel quite lonely fighting the good fight for data in this sector, and it's such a pleasure to have somebody else saying very, very similar things. I think one of the things, I mean, and Hannah, I was chatting with your head of regeneration, Simon, yesterday, actually, as it turns out. And we're having a conversation which I think really speaks to what you brought out there, Bola. So at the moment, the industry bases almost all of its asset decisions on two bits of information: the stock condition survey and EPCs. And those two bits of information are probably the least reliable, the lowest quality sources of information that you can almost imagine. I mean, EPCs are notoriously poor quality, even getting things like room counts wrong. And when we look at stock condition, they're often very, very superficial. They never deal with the kind of digital twin you might get from doing an invasive survey from time to time to actually understand what the building is. And Hannah, you and I had a really interesting dinner last week with colleagues from Orbit when they were talking about the enormous benefit they've got from doing these BIM surveys of existing buildings. A lot of people shy away from that, and they shy away from drilling the holes to find out really what's going on. But they were talking about really, easily demonstrated return on investment from doing exactly that stuff on the existing stock, which of course is the vast majority of the stock. We don't build that much that's new. So I wonder, Hannah, I know you've been a huge advocate and pioneer at Home Group to move this stuff forwards, but I know that's not always been an easy journey either. So what is the narrative that you use internally? How do you make time and resources available for it? And what kind of pushback are you getting from colleagues? I mean, what's that like, being that advocate?
I suppose Home Group, my experience has been slightly different. In the past, I think people have seen this as, an expense, getting the right process. It's time consuming. I know from construction projects having somebody just there to deal with the documents, coming in and checking those documents. It's deemed, an expensive nice to have. So I think to the construction part, we need to make sure that we've got the right skills, resource there to actually understand the data that's coming in and to make sure it's correct. Because I'll challenge anyone who has taken handover of a building not to have found that the as-built and the actual physical build are different, despite it being signed off by an architect, despite it going through variation process. And I think that's, so it's challenging making the business case. And I think if we can get some research to demonstrate that value, it would be helpful, but also just accepting that this isn't straightforward. And we do need to upskill, we do need to get the right people in post to understand what they're dealing with and to actually bring that data to life is the other part. But in terms of Home Group and some of the challenges, I think this has been sort of welcome. People don't quite understand what it means yet. I think as we get into it, we're going to see the pushback, but people are saying, thank goodness, we're finally getting some traction on this. But we're at the very start of that journey. And I've just written our asset management strategy, and it's not, funny enough, we've been having discussions where it's not an asset plan because we don't yet have the data to inform the plan, but we have a document that sets principles and standards and good best practice. And data is front and center in that, because I can't write a strategy of, what investment looks like in our homes until I can get the data in a granular format to help inform those decisions. So it's got a big role. The business is alive to that and is welcoming it. And I'm hoping I'm going to be pushing on an open door when I go and ask for lots of money to actually start gathering this data that's actually going to give us the detail we need to make some decent decisions.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about assets that have huge value. So actually, we might be talking millions in terms of the investment to get some of the data, but compared to what gets saved, I mean, it's it's not exactly a drop in the ocean, but it's certainly, as we were saying just last week, I mean, easily, the return on investment is normally quite easily demonstrated and quickly, within perhaps a year. And we touched earlier on the challenge that I know you and I have sometimes received around this work, that it can feel like yet another thing to do, which would be great if we had time, sort of thing. But people somehow struggle to get it to the top of the priorities or make time for it. What would you say to someone who's kind of in that mindset at the moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't blame you. I can relate to that because, as Hannah, as you've explained, it can feel enormous, can't it, this? And I think my advice would be just take it a step at a time. Be honest with yourself and with who you're working with, what your capacity is, what your capability is right now, what state you are in. You know, if your data is locked in documents and so forth. We're working with Environment Agency, for instance, and back in my geospatial days, we spent a lot of time identifying, well, what is the critical data to answer a particular question, a problem. So what's your priority problem? What's the one which is, and it's ironic, isn't it? We talk about return on investment and benefits, but Bolo, you and I, we've often talked about actually risk, liability. Actually, you could be put into prison. So there is this bizarre thing. Is oh no, you've got to do return on investment and benefits. Whereas actually, there's a real urgency about some of this, which it's horrible to be talking about disasters and so forth, because it kind of maybe it's an English culture. It's no, you can't do it that way. But the stark reality is that if as-built are submitted which actually do not reflect reality, we know, we have an example, we have of more than compelling, a heart-wrenching story of Grenville of what can occur. So there does feel like, well, what is the struggle here? But to come back to your question, Chris, is start with what your critical problem is. What is your priority right now? And think about, okay, what is the information, the data that I need? And you will probably find it's scattered in documents. But as a first step, think about how actually you could bring that in. So you've got a core set of data which answers that question. Now, what we want to do as an initiative is to discover what the key problems are across the sector. And then we can either say, actually, do you know that there is an answer there that we can help you with? There is a common approach here that, for Golden Thread, there could be a common approach to what data you require and the way it's delivered. So it's cold open data. There is a standard behind it. But if the technologist providers can then use those open standards, you don't need to worry about it. So there is a little bit of, don't let you expect to do it. Help us put a bit more pressure on those who can provide the right tools. And then those will help you go to a consistent common approach. So it's not just home group, it's actually across the sector, where we're saying, you know what, a lot of you are answering or trying to address the same problem, but we're all feeling as though we've got to reinvent the wheel again. Let's not do that. Let's actually come together, say, you know what, I could do it by my way, but I'm wasting so much time, energy, belief in doing this. So I'll now accept, no, we'll converge to a common approach here. So I think, Chris, the answer is, it can be very difficult. I think we make it difficult for ourselves. And this is where actually accepting going forward with a common approach will help everybody in the long run. And that's what the initiative aims to do, is to bring us all together to agree to a common approach, which we will need to develop. There will be some answers which are already there. There'll be some where we need to do some work. That's what the initiative is about. Does that answer your question okay, Chris?
I think it does. Thank you for that. So I'm conscious of time. We're just coming to the end here. There is one question that we've not got to around data standards. So Hamish, thank you for that. The short answer is that, as Anne articulated, The UK BIM framework will be the basis of that implementation, and the UK BIM framework, of course, is based on 19650, which in turn does call out some data standards that it suggests you should consider. But that work is really phase 2 work. So that's a short answer, but Hamish, you know where to find me. We can certainly talk more about that. So I would just like to wrap this up, really, say thank you so much to Anne, Bola and Hannah. A great conversation. As you said, Bola, never enough time for these. We could certainly talk all day. But we really appreciate your time and expertise and your willingness to share that with the social housing sector. So thank you very much. We will be sharing the recording of this and some summary notes and maybe even some sound bites and snippets, who knows, over coming days. And as Anne and Bola actually indicated, please do get signed up for the NEMA launch next week, the 7th. Just Google NEMA Virtual Conference and you will find all the details. Thank you, everyone.